Imagine a brand new $70,000 heavy-duty truck sitting in a suburban driveway. To most people, that truck represents a monthly payment of roughly $1,200, or perhaps a significant dent in a savings account. But if we look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data from 2024, we see a different story starting to emerge. Transportation costs for the average household have climbed to $13,318 per year, accounting for 17% of total spending. When you take that $70,000 purchase price and project it over 30 years of lost investment gains at a 7% annual return, that truck isn't just a vehicle. It represents over $1 million of theoretical wealth that will never exist in a retirement account. However, the truck isn't the real predator here. It is merely the most visible symptom of a much deeper structural shift in how we live and work. Most of us feel like we are running faster just to stay in the same place. We talk about inflation and housing costs, but we rarely discuss the second rent we pay every month. This isn't a rent paid to a landlord, but a tax paid to buy back our own time. When a household becomes time poor, they begin to outsource every friction point in their lives. They pay for grocery delivery to save an hour, they pay for lawn care to save an afternoon, and they pay for premium, reliable transportation to ensure they never miss a minute of a high-stakes job. Eventually, these aren't treats or luxuries anymore. Consider the typical American household today. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics in 2024, nearly 50% of married couple families are dual-income households. On the surface, 2 paychecks should mean more breathing room. In reality, it often creates a time deficit that must be filled with cash. When both adults are working, the domestic labor that used to be handled internally must be outsourced. This is where the second rent begins to accumulate. Housing is already the largest burden, costing the average household $26,266 annually, or over 33% of their total spending. Let's look at a specific household to understand the math. Imagine a couple earning a combined $140,000 a year. After taxes, they might take home $9,000 a month. Their mortgage takes $3,000. 2 car payments, including that heavy-duty truck, take $1,500. Then comes the child care. Data from Child Care Aware of America in 2024 shows the average cost has hit $13,128 a year, having jumped 29% since 2020. In our example, that is another $1,100 a month. Before they have even bought a single gallon of milk or paid a utility bill, $5,600 is gone. The pressure on these families is intensifying because the costs of being time poor are rising faster than the costs of the goods themselves. The Bank of America Institute reported in October 2025 that childcare inflation was rising at 5.2% year over year. That is 1.5 times faster than the overall rate of inflation. It is a compounding penalty for working. We are essentially seeing a world where the more you work, the more expensive it becomes to simply exist. But why do we choose the most expensive versions of these tools? It often comes down to the scarcity of our own attention. When we are exhausted, our ability to make friction-heavy financial decisions evaporates. We stop using cash because it requires a trip to an ATM or a manual counting of change. The Atlanta Fed study on consumer payment choice noted that the average cash held on a person dropped from $81 in 2023 to just $67 in 2024. We move toward digital, frictionless payments because they are faster, even if they make us less aware of the microtransactions that bleed our accounts dry. This exhaustion isn't distributed equally. The Levy Economics Institute noted in 2025 that roughly 39% of single adults live in time poverty. For employed women, that rate is 9 percentage points higher than it is for men. When you are time poor, you cannot shop for deals, you cannot cook from scratch, and you certainly cannot spend 4 hours researching how to fix a leaky faucet. You pay the professional rate for everything. It is important to pause here and acknowledge that this isn't a universal trap. This model depends heavily on geographical location and the specific demands of one's career. A family living in a low-cost rural area with a strong multi-generational support system might look at these numbers and find them unrecognizable. Reasonable people also disagree on the value of time itself. For some, Spending $20,000 a year to outsource chores is a rational trade if it allows them to focus on a business that generates $200,000 in new value. We also have to consider the lack of structural support. Only 10% of private sector workers had access to employer-sponsored commuting subsidies in 2024, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Without these supports, the entire burden of the last mile falls on the individual. Let's return to our example household and look at the leftover cash. After their primary expenses and the second rent of convenience, they might have $2,000 left for everything else: food, clothing, insurance, and the occasional dinner out. If they save $500 a month, they feel like they are doing well. But that $70,000 truck is costing them more in depreciation and interest than they are putting into their 401k. When you calculate the opportunity cost, the truck is consuming their future at a rate of several $100s per day. A fair counter-argument to this perspective is that the million-dollar truck math is a bit of a vacuum experiment. It assumes that if you didn't buy the truck, you would perfectly invest every cent of that money into a low-cost index fund for 3 decades without ever touching it. In reality, human psychology rarely works that way. Most people who skip the expensive truck might just end up spending that same money on smaller, less visible leaks like more expensive vacations or upgraded home furnishings. The truck is at least a tangible asset, even if it's a depreciating one. However, while it's true that people aren't perfect math machines, the scale of the truck purchase creates a forced commitment to a high overhead life. Another valid point is that for many, a reliable, large vehicle is an insurance policy against the chaos of life. If a cheap used car breaks down and causes you to lose a high-paying job, the savings of the cheaper car vanish instantly. In a society with a thin safety net, overinvesting in reliability, whether that's a new truck or expensive childcare, is a form of risk management. It's a way of ensuring that the fragile tower of a dual-income household doesn't come crashing down because of one bad alternator. We have reached a point where the cost of participating in the modern economy at a high level requires a massive upfront investment in lifestyle overhead. We are paying a premium for everything because we no longer have the time to be resourceful. Resourcefulness is a slow process. It requires searching, waiting, and doing. If we look at the trajectory of these costs, particularly the way childcare and transportation are outpacing wage growth for many sectors, the math becomes increasingly difficult to solve. We are seeing a divergence where one group of people uses their income to buy assets that produce more income, while another group, often earning the exact same amount, uses their income to buy back the time they spent earning it. The $70,000 truck is a symbol of a life lived at the limit of one's capacity. It represents a bet that the future will always be as productive as the present. But as the data suggests, that bet is becoming riskier. When 33% of your income is locked into housing and 17% is locked into transportation, you have lost 50% of your maneuverability before you've even woken up for the day. This is not a call for asceticism or a suggestion that everyone should drive 20-year-old sedans and never order takeout. It is an observation of a structural trap. We have built a society where the most efficient way to live in the short term is the most damaging way to live in the long term. The conveniences that save our sanity on a Tuesday afternoon are the same expenses that keep us working until we are 70. The million-dollar truck is just the most honest expression of that trade-off. When we look at the financial landscape of the next decade, the families that thrive might not be the ones who earn the most, but the ones who successfully resist the urge to outsource their entire existence. They will be the ones who find ways to lower their monthly minimum, even if it means moving slower than their neighbors. The $1 million isn't missing because of a single bad decision or a lack of effort. It's missing because it was nibbled away $50 at a time by a world that convinced us that our time was too valuable to spend on the basics of life. We traded our future freedom for a slightly more tolerable Tuesday, and while that might feel like a fair trade in the heat of a 60-hour work week, the math of retirement is cold and indifferent to our exhaustion.